I thought I'd found love again at 68, after 2 years of sleeping alone in a bed that felt too big without Tom beside me. Richard made me feel alive in a way I thought I'd never experience again. But the night I caught him, whispering to my mother in the darkness of my living room, watching her nod with a clarity she hadn't shown in months, I realized that everything I believed about the man I was falling for, and about my own mother, was built on secrets I was never meant to discover. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. The first time I saw Richard Hayes, he was arguing passionately about Hemingway's portrayal of women in The Sun Also Rises. We were at the Meadowbrook Senior Center's book club, and I'd only come because my daughter Sarah insisted I needed to get out of the house and live again. I'd been attending for 3 weeks, sitting quietly in the back, contributing nothing, just going through the motions to keep Sarah from worrying. But that Thursday afternoon, Richard stood up, tall, silver-haired, with laugh lines around his blue eyes, and said something that made me forget I'd promised myself I'd never care about anyone's opinion again. Maybe, he said, looking directly at me for some reason, we judge Hemingway's women too harshly because we forget that strength doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is endure. I found myself nodding before I could stop myself. He noticed. After the meeting, he approached me at the coffee station. I'm Richard, he said, extending his hand. And you're the woman who's been sitting in the back corner, looking like she's anywhere but here. I should have been offended. Instead, I laughed, really laughed, for the first time since Tom's funeral. Maggie Richardson, and you're right, I've been somewhere else entirely. Well, Maggie Richardson, he said, pouring me a cup of coffee without asking how I took it, then getting it exactly right with 1 cream and no sugar. Maybe it's time to come back. That was 6 months ago. 6 months of morning phone calls and afternoon walks in the park. 6 months of dinners where he insisted on meeting my family, charming my daughters Sarah and Jennifer, playing checkers with my mother, Dorothy, who lived with me since her dementia diagnosis last year. 6 months of feeling like maybe, just maybe, life wasn't over at 68. Tom had been my everything for 40 years. We'd married young, built a life together, raised 2 beautiful daughters, and planned to travel the world in retirement. Then pancreatic cancer took him in 4 brutal months, and suddenly I was alone in a 4-bedroom house with only my increasingly confused mother for company. My daughters wanted me to put Mom in a facility. You've given enough, Mama, Sarah kept saying. You deserve to live your own life now. But how could I? Mom had cared for me my entire childhood, supported me through difficult teenage years, babysat my girls while I worked. When Dad died 15 years ago, she'd remained independent until just last year when the forgetting started. First little things, where she'd put her keys, what day it was. Then bigger things, thinking my daughters were still children, asking when Dad was coming home from work. The doctors said it would only get worse. They were right. Some days Mom didn't know who I was. Other days she was completely lucid, telling stories from her youth with perfect clarity. There was no predicting which version of her would wake up each morning. Richard never seemed bothered by any of it. When Mom called him Harold, her brother who died in Vietnam, Richard just smiled and answered to it. When she insisted it was 1952 and we needed to get to church, Richard offered to drive us, then gently redirected her attention to the birds outside the window until the moment passed. You're so patient with her, I told him one evening as we sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky pink and orange. She's a person, Maggie, not a problem to be solved, he said, taking my hand. Besides, I see where you get your strength from. Your mother must have been something special in her day. I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling safe for the first time in years. She was. She is. I just wish you could have known her before. I know her now, he said simply. That's enough. That night, after Richard left, I stood in my bedroom and looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. At 68, I wasn't the young bride Tom had married. My hair was silver now, cut short for convenience. My face showed every year, every worry, every loss. But my eyes looked different than they had 6 months ago. They looked alive. Is this okay, Tom? I whispered to the photograph on my nightstand. Tom at 50, grinning at the camera on our 30th anniversary cruise. Am I allowed to feel this way again? The photograph didn't answer, of course. But I didn't feel guilty anymore. That had to mean something. Richard started coming over more frequently. 3 times a week became 4, then 5. He'd bring groceries and cook dinner, insisting I relax while he handled everything. He'd sit with Mom while I took long baths or caught up with friends on the phone. He integrated himself into our lives so seamlessly that it started to feel like he'd always been there. "I think he's going to propose," Jennifer said one Sunday when she came by for lunch. She was my younger daughter, more romantic than practical Sarah. "The way he looks at you." "Mom, that's a man in love. We're too old for that kind of talk," I said, but I was smiling. "You're never too old for love," Jennifer insisted. "Daddy would want you to be happy." I believed her. I believed Richard. I believed in the future again. That's what made what happened next so devastating. Because when you believe in something completely, the betrayal cuts deeper than any blade. It started 3 weeks after Jennifer's comment about Richard proposing. I'd been sleeping better than I had in years, falling into deep, dreamless rest instead of the fitful sleep that had plagued me since Tom's death. But that particular Tuesday night, something woke me. I opened my eyes to complete darkness, disoriented. The red numbers on my bedside clock read 12:47 a.m. I lay still, listening, trying to identify what had pulled me from sleep. That's when I heard it, voices low and urgent, coming from downstairs. My first thought was Mom. She wandered sometimes, confused and agitated in the middle of the night, looking for my father or trying to go home, to a house we'd sold 15 years ago. I'd installed alarms on the exterior doors after she'd once made it halfway down the block in her nightgown before a neighbor found her. I grabbed my robe and hurried downstairs, my heart already racing with worry. But when I reached the landing, I froze. The living room lamps were off, but the moonlight streaming through the bay window illuminated 2 figures sitting close together on my couch. My mother, wearing her pink nightgown, sat upright with perfect posture, not the confused, hunched woman who'd asked me 3 times that morning what year it was. And beside her, leaning in close, speaking in low, intense whispers, was Richard. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, my hand pressed against the wall for support. Richard wasn't supposed to be here. He'd left at 8 o'clock, kissing my forehead at the door and telling me he'd call in the morning. What was he doing in my house at nearly 1 in the morning? And why was he having what looked like a very serious conversation with my mother, who supposedly couldn't remember what she'd eaten for breakfast? "Has to be done carefully," Richard was saying, his voice barely audible. "She can't know yet. Not until everything is in place." My blood turned to ice. He was talking about me. Mom nodded, her face more focused than I'd seen it in months. "I understand, but Richard, are you absolutely certain about the accounts? If there's any mistake..." "There won't be," Richard interrupted gently. "I've checked everything 3 times. The house is the main concern. Once we handle that, the rest will fall into place." The house. My house, the home Tom and I had bought 32 years ago, where we'd raised our daughters, where every room held memories. My hands started shaking. "And the girls?" Mom asked. "Sarah and Jennifer, they'll understand eventually, won't they? They'll have to," Richard said. His voice was firm, almost cold. I'd never heard him use that tone before. "This is bigger than their feelings. You know that, Dorothy." Dorothy. He called her Dorothy, not Mom or Dot like everyone else did. And she'd responded to it with perfect clarity, no confusion, no asking who he was or where my father had gone. I took a step backward, my mind reeling. How long had this been going on? These midnight conversations, this scheming about my house, my accounts, my daughters. How many times had Richard snuck into my home while I slept upstairs, trusting him, falling in love with him? The worst part was my mother, my own mother, who I'd been caring for, sacrificing my own comfort and freedom to keep her safe, was apparently lucid enough to conspire against me. The confusion, the memory loss, the helplessness, had it all been an act? "When will you tell her?" Mom asked. "Soon," Richard replied. "But timing is everything, Dorothy. If we move too fast, she'll resist. She has to believe it's her own idea." I'd heard enough. My stomach churned with nausea, and tears burned behind my eyes. I turned and crept back upstairs, moving as silently as possible. Once in my bedroom, I closed the door and leaned against it, my whole body trembling. The man I'd been falling in love with was conning me. And my own mother was helping him do it. I spent the rest of that night sitting on my bed, staring at Tom's photograph in the darkness. "I'm so sorry," I whispered to him. "I should have known better. I should have stayed alone." By morning, I heard Richard's car start in the driveway. I went to the window and watched him leave, his face peaceful and relaxed as he drove away. Minutes later, I heard Mom shuffling around downstairs, and when I went down, she was standing in the kitchen looking confused, staring at the coffee maker like she'd never seen one before. "Maggie," she said when she saw me. "Is it morning? I had the strangest dreams last night." I wanted to scream at her, to demand the truth. Instead, I smiled tightly and guided her to a chair. "Yes, Mom, it's morning. Let me make you some coffee?" She nodded gratefully, looking every bit the confused elderly woman who needed my care. But I knew better now. This was all an act. The question was why, and what exactly were Richard and my mother planning to do with my house, my accounts, and my life? When Richard called at 9 o'clock like he'd promised, his voice was warm and loving. "Good morning, beautiful. How did you sleep?" "Fine." I lied, my voice steady despite the rage and heartbreak churning inside me. "Just fine. I was thinking," he said, "maybe I could take you and Dorothy out for lunch today. That little Italian place you love." He wanted to take us out, to spend more time winning my trust while secretly plotting against me. "That sounds nice," I heard myself say. "Mom would like that?" After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and made a decision. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet. First, I needed to know exactly what they were planning. I needed evidence. I needed to understand how deep this betrayal went. Because if Richard thought he could steal from me, if my own mother was helping him do it, then I would find out everything. And then I would decide what to do about it. I'd spent 2 years being the grieving widow, and 6 months being the grateful girlfriend. But I'd forgotten something important. I was also Tom Richardson's wife. And Tom had always said I was the strongest person he knew. It was time to prove him right. I started with the basics. That afternoon, while Richard took Mom out to the Italian restaurant, claiming I looked tired and should rest, I went through my important papers. Everything Tom and I had built was documented in the filing cabinet in our home office: the house deed, bank statements, investment accounts, insurance policies. I spread everything across the desk, my reading glasses perched on my nose, and began checking. The house was still solely in my name. Tom had transferred everything to me before he died to avoid probate complications. Our savings account, our checking account, the small investment portfolio Tom had managed so carefully, all of it showed my name alone. Nothing was missing. Nothing had been changed. So what were Richard and Mom talking about? I photographed every document with my phone, something Jennifer had taught me to do, just in case. Then I called my bank and asked them to put a fraud alert on all my accounts. The young woman on the phone was helpful and patient, walking me through the process. "Has someone attempted to access your accounts, Mrs. Richardson?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "I just want to be careful." "That's very wise. We'll flag everything. No changes can be made without you physically coming into the branch with 2 forms of ID." It was a start. But it didn't answer my real questions. If Richard wasn't after my money directly, what was he after? And why was my mother, who I'd believed was slipping away from dementia, suddenly lucid enough to have complex conversations about accounts and houses in the middle of the night? When Richard brought Mom home at 3 o'clock, they were both laughing about something. Mom looked happy, almost glowing. Richard had his hand gently on her elbow, guiding her up the porch steps like she was precious cargo. "We had a wonderful time," Richard said, kissing my cheek. "Your mother told the waiter the most amazing story about your father proposing to her at a baseball game in 1955. I looked at Mom, who was smiling serenely. "It was at Yankee Stadium," she said clearly. "He bought the ring with his Army bonus and hid it in a box of Cracker Jacks. When I found it, I screamed so loud they stopped the game." My heart constricted. That story was true. I'd heard it 100 times growing up. But Mom hadn't remembered details like that in months. She'd been mixing up decades, calling my daughters by their childhood names, asking for people long dead. "That's a beautiful story, Dorothy," Richard said softly. And the way he looked at her made my blood boil. Like he genuinely cared. Like he wasn't using her to scheme against me. After Richard left that evening, promising to call tomorrow, telling me he loved me for the first time, those words I'd been longing to hear now felt like poison. I sat with Mom in the living room. She was watching her favorite game show, calling out answers that were mostly wrong. "Mom," I said carefully, "do you remember meeting Richard?" At the beginning, she looked at me blankly. "Richard? Who's Richard, dear?" My stomach turned. "My boyfriend, Mom. The man who just brought you home from lunch." "Oh," she laughed, embarrassed. "Of course. I'm sorry, honey. Sometimes the names just slip away. He's a nice man, isn't he? He reminds me of someone, but I can't quite place who. She seemed genuinely confused now. So which was real? The sharp, focused woman from last night, or this confused one sitting beside me? Could someone fake dementia this convincingly? I decided to call Sarah. She was the practical one, the lawyer. If anyone could help me think through this rationally, it was my eldest daughter. Mom. Slow down, Sarah said when I called her after putting Dorothy to bed. You're saying Richard was in the house at 1 in the morning, talking to Grandma about your accounts. In the house, I added. He said something about how I can't know yet, not until everything is in place. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Have you checked your credit report, your bank accounts? Maybe he's been taking out loans in your name or… I checked everything. Nothing's been touched. Then what could he be planning? Sarah's voice was tight with worry. Mom? I never completely trusted him. It all felt too good to be true, you know? A handsome, attentive man just happening to fall for you right when you were vulnerable. Her words stung, even though I knew she meant well. You think I'm too old and broken for someone to love me genuinely? No, Sarah said quickly. That's not what I meant. I just mean that con artists target widows, especially wealthy ones. You and Dad built a good life. The house alone is worth $500,000 and… I'm not wealthy, Sarah. We're comfortable, but… Oh, Mom, comfortable is wealthy to some people. And you're trusting. That makes you a target. After I hung up, I felt worse, not better. Sarah was right about one thing. I'd been vulnerable when I met Richard, lonely, grieving, desperate for connection. Had he seen that? Had he chosen me specifically because I was an easy mark? But that didn't explain my mother's involvement. What could Richard possibly have offered her to make her betray her own daughter? The next morning, I did something I wasn't proud of. When Mom was in the bathroom, I went through her bedroom. I checked her drawers, her closet, under her mattress. I was looking for anything, letters, documents, evidence of what she and Richard were planning. In her nightstand, beneath a stack of old greeting cards, I found a spiral notebook. My hands shook as I opened it. The pages were filled with Mom's handwriting, but not the shaky, uncertain scrawl she'd been using lately. This was her old handwriting, firm and clear, and it was dated. The most recent entry was from 3 days ago, Tuesday, October 6th. Met with Richard again today. He's making progress with Maggie, but she's still resistant to the idea of traveling. Need to push harder on the life is short angle. Time is running out. I read the entry 3 more times, my mind refusing to process it. Time is running out. Resistant to traveling, what did any of this mean? I flipped backward through the notebook, page after page of entries, going back months. Notes about Richard's progress with me, observations about my mood, strategies for moving forward with the plan. And then, near the beginning of the notebook, I found an entry that made my blood run cold. Met Richard Hayes today through the attorney. He's agreed to help. Says he's done this before. Knows how to handle resistant adult children. The fee is steep, but worth it if it means Maggie can finally live the life she deserves instead of martyring herself for me. If I have to play the confused old woman to make this work, so be it. My daughter's happiness is worth more than my pride. I sat on the edge of Mom's bed, the notebook trembling in my hands. The attorney, a fee, playing confused. This wasn't about stealing from me. This was something else entirely. But what? And why would my mother think she needed to trick me into something? For my own good. Before I could process any of it, I heard the bathroom door open. I quickly shoved the notebook back into the nightstand and hurried out of Mom's room. Maggie. Mom called from the hallway, sounding uncertain and confused again. Is it breakfast time? I'm not sure what day it is. I looked at her, at the woman who'd raised me, who I thought I knew better than anyone. And I realized I didn't know her at all. Or maybe I'd never let myself see her clearly. Yes, Mom, I said quietly. It's breakfast time. But as I made eggs and toast, my mind was racing. I needed answers. Real answers. And I knew exactly who was going to give them to me. Tonight, when Richard came for dinner, I was going to follow him when he left. I was going to find out where he went, who he really was, and what kind of con he was running on me and my mother. Because nothing about this made sense. And until it did, I couldn't rest. Richard arrived at 6:30 that evening with a bouquet of daisies. My favorite. I forced a smile as I took them, trying to ignore how my stomach twisted at his gentle kiss on my cheek. You look beautiful, he said, and I wondered how many times he'd practiced that line. How many other lonely widows had heard those same words from his lips. Dinner was tense, at least for me. Richard and Mom chatted easily, while I pushed food around my plate, barely tasting anything. I watched them interact, the way he listened to her stories, the way she responded to him with varying levels of clarity. Sometimes she called him Richard. Other times she seemed confused about who he was. But now that I'd read her notebook, I saw it differently. Every confused moment looked calculated. Every lucid conversation seemed strategic. "Maggie, you're quiet tonight," Richard observed, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "Everything okay?" "Just tired." I lied. "I haven't been sleeping well." He squeezed my hand sympathetically. "Maybe you're doing too much. You know, I've been thinking, what if we hired some help for Dorothy? Someone who could stay with her a few days a week, give you a break." There it was again. Another suggestion about getting help for Mom. Giving me more freedom. I thought it was thoughtful before. Now it felt like part of a plan. "I'll think about it," I said noncommittally. After dinner, Richard helped me clear the dishes while Mom dozed in her recliner. In the kitchen, he pulled me close, wrapping his arms around me. "I love you, Maggie," he whispered against my hair. "I know I just said it yesterday, but I need you to know. You've brought light back into my life. 6 months ago, hell 3 days ago, those words would have made me melt. Now they felt like manipulation." I pulled back slightly, studying his face. He looked sincere. His blue eyes were warm, his smile genuine. Either he was an incredible actor, or I was losing my mind. "I love you too," I heard myself say, and hated how easily the lie came. He left at 9 after helping me get Mom settled for bed. I watched from the window as his car disappeared down the street. Then I grabbed my keys and purse. "Mom," I called up the stairs, "I'm running to the store. I'll be back soon." "Okay, dear," she called back, sounding sleepy. I knew it was risky leaving her alone, but I'd locked all the doors and set the alarms. She'd be safe for an hour. I drove in the direction Richard had gone, my heart pounding. I had no idea if I'd find him or where he might have gone. But 20 minutes later, I spotted his silver Toyota in the parking lot of a small office building on the edge of town. The building was mostly dark except for a few lit windows on the second floor. I parked across the street, killed my engine, and waited. For what I wasn't sure, evidence. Confirmation of my worst fears. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. I was starting to feel foolish when I saw Richard emerge from the building with another man. Older, maybe 75, wearing a suit despite the late hour. They stood in the parking lot talking, and even from a distance, I could see Richard gesturing emphatically about something. I grabbed my phone and zoomed in, taking photos. The other man handed Richard what looked like a folder. They shook hands, and then Richard got in his car and drove away. I waited for the other man to leave, then quickly drove closer to the building, trying to see what businesses were listed on the directory by the entrance. In the dim light, I could make out several names: an insurance agency, a tax preparation service, and on the second floor, Whitmore and Associates, estate planning attorneys. Estate planning. My mother had mentioned an attorney in her notebook. I took a photo of the directory, then drove home, my mind spinning. Why would Richard be meeting with an estate planning attorney at 9:30 at night? Unless... The pieces started clicking together in a way that made me feel sick. Estate planning. My mother's notebook talking about time running out. Richard's suggestions about me traveling, living my life, getting help for Mom. Was my mother dying? Was that what this was about? Some elaborate plan to prepare for her death without telling me. But that didn't make sense either. Mom had been to the doctor just 2 months ago for her regular checkup. They'd adjusted her dementia medication, but there was no mention of any terminal illness. When I got home, I found Mom still awake, sitting in her recliner with a photo album open on her lap. She looked up when I entered, and her eyes were clear and focused. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked carefully. "Come sit with me, Maggie," she said, patting the chair beside her. Her voice was strong, not the wavering, uncertain tone she'd been using. "I want to show you something." I sat wary, wondering which version of my mother I was dealing with now. She pointed to a photograph. Her and my father on their wedding day, young and radiant with possibility. "Your father was the love of my life," she said softly. 42 years we had together. Not enough, but more than many people get. "I know, Mom. When he died, I thought my life was over," she continued, still looking at the photo. "I thought I'd just exist until it was my time to join him. But you know what? I kept living. I found joy again. I traveled. Do you remember? I went to Italy with the church group. I took painting classes. I volunteered at the hospital." She looked at me then, and her gaze was piercing. "I didn't stop living just because Harold was gone. The use of my father's name, the clarity of her memories, this wasn't the confused woman who'd been asking what year it was. This was my mother, fully present. But then you got sick, I said quietly. The dementia? Yes? She interrupted, her voice suddenly bitter. The dementia. The thing that made my capable, independent daughter put her entire life on hold to become my caretaker. The words hit me like a slap. I wanted to take care of you. Did you? She closed the photo album with a sharp snap. Or did you need to take care of me, need to have a purpose after Tom died, need to be needed? Tears burned in my eyes. That's not fair, isn't it? Mom's voice softened slightly. Maggie, you're my daughter, and I love you more than life itself. But watching you sacrifice everything, your freedom, your happiness, your future, just to monitor whether I've taken my pills. It's been breaking my heart. I don't understand. I whispered. What are you saying? She took my hand, and I felt how thin her fingers had become, how fragile she seemed despite the strength in her voice. I'm saying that sometimes the people who love us most have to make hard choices for us. Even if it means we get angry, even if it means we feel betrayed. Was Richard part of this hard choice? Mom smiled sadly. Richard is a good man, Maggie, better than you know. And yes, he's part of it. But not in the way you think. Then tell me, I demanded, pulling my hand away. Tell me what's going on. Why you're pretending to be confused when you're clearly not. Why Richard is meeting with estate attorneys. Why you're both whispering about my house and my accounts. Just tell me the truth. For a long moment, Mom just looked at me. Then she stood, suddenly seeming every one of her 89 years. Not yet, she said quietly. Soon, but not yet. There's still something that needs to happen first. She started toward the stairs, then paused. But I will tell you this. Everything Richard and I have done, we've done because we love you. And when you know the truth, I hope you'll understand. I hope you'll forgive us. She climbed the stairs slowly, leaving me alone in the living room with more questions than answers. I sat there until midnight, the photo album still on the chair beside me. Finally, I pulled out my phone and called Sarah. Mom, it's almost 1 a.m, she answered groggily. Sarah, I need you to do something for me. Use your lawyer connections. Find out everything you can about Richard Hayes. Background check, employment history, financial records, everything. You really think he's dangerous? I thought about Richard's gentle hands helping my mother up the stairs. His patient smile when she called him by the wrong name, the way he'd held me in the kitchen, telling me he loved me. I don't know what he is, I admitted. But I need to know the truth, all of it. Okay, Sarah said. I'll make some calls tomorrow. But Mom, maybe you should stay somewhere else until we know. No, I interrupted. Whatever's happening, it's happening in this house. And I'm going to see it through. After I hung up, I went upstairs and passed by Mom's room. Her light was still on, shining under the door. And I could hear her voice, soft and clear, talking to someone. I pressed my ear against the door. Yes? Richard, she knows something's wrong. No, I didn't tell her. I think we need to move faster. She's investigating, and if she finds out the wrong way. Yes, I understand. Tomorrow then. We'll do it tomorrow. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering. Tomorrow. Whatever they were planning, it was happening tomorrow. And I was going to be ready. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every shadow seemed threatening. I kept replaying Mom's phone conversation with Richard, trying to decode what doing it tomorrow meant. Were they planning to drug me, forge documents while I was out, force me into signing something? By 7 a.m., I was exhausted but wired on adrenaline and coffee. I'd already called Sarah twice, but she hadn't learned anything yet. Background checks took time, even with legal connections. Mom came downstairs at 8, moving slowly, wearing her favorite yellow cardigan. She looked at me across the kitchen table, and I saw no confusion in her eyes. Just sadness and determination. Today's the day, she said simply, pouring herself coffee. Richard will be here at 10, and then you'll know everything? Why not just tell me now? I demanded. Why all the secrets and manipulation? Because you wouldn't have listened, Mom said, sitting down across from me. You would have fought us, argued, and refused. Just like you've been refusing for 2 years to actually live your life. I am living my life. I'm taking care of you. You're hiding, Mom interrupted sharply. You're using me as an excuse not to face your own grief, your own future, your own fear of being alone. The words cut deep because part of me knew they were true. But I wasn't ready to admit it. At exactly 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I answered it to find not just Richard, but the man I'd seen him with in the parking lot last night. Up close, he looked distinguished and professional, carrying a leather briefcase. "Maggie," Richard said gently, "this is James Whitmore. He's an estate planning attorney. May we come in?" I stood aside, my arms crossed defensively. They settled in the living room, Richard on the couch, Mr. Whitmore in the armchair, and Mom beside Richard. I remained standing, feeling like I needed the height advantage. "Mrs. Richardson," Whitmore began, "I understand this situation is confusing and probably frightening. Your mother and Mr. Hayes have asked me to explain what's been happening over the past 6 months." "I think that's a good idea," I said coldly. Mr. Whitmore opened his briefcase and pulled out several folders. "Let me start with Mr. Hayes. Richard, would you like to explain, or shall I?" Richard looked at me, and I saw genuine emotion in his eyes. Sadness, hope, fear. "Maggie, everything I've told you about myself is true. I was married for 38 years. My wife, Linda, died 3 years ago of Alzheimer's. I was her caretaker for the final 5 years, and," I prompted unmoved, "and after she passed I felt lost, purposeless. Until a friend suggested I volunteer with an organization called Second Chapters. It's a group that helps widows and widowers transition back into independent living after years of caregiving." My stomach dropped. "You're what? A professional companion? You're paid to date lonely widows?" "No," Richard said firmly. "I'm not paid at all. I volunteer. And I don't date anyone. You're the first woman I've had feelings for since Linda died. That part is completely real, Maggie. I love you. That was never part of any plan." "Then what was the plan?" I asked, my voice shaking. Mom spoke up then. "The plan was to help you see that you could have a life again. That you didn't need to sacrifice everything for me." Mr. Whitmore laid out several documents on the coffee table. "Mrs. Richardson, your mother came to see me 9 months ago. She'd been diagnosed with early-stage dementia, but her cognition was still largely intact. She was terrified, not of dying, but of what her illness would do to you." "I don't understand. Your mother," Mr. Whitmore continued, "observed how you'd stopped living after your husband died. How you'd turned down opportunities to travel with friends, refused to pursue hobbies, declined invitations to social events. And when she was diagnosed, you immediately assumed the role of full-time caregiver, even though she was still quite capable of caring for herself." I looked at Mom, feeling betrayed. "You told a stranger all of this." "I told him the truth," Mom said quietly. "That my brilliant, capable daughter was slowly disappearing into grief and obligation. And I knew that as my dementia progressed, you'd only sink deeper into that caretaker role until there was nothing left of the Maggie I raised." Richard took over. "Your mother asked Mr. Whitmore if there was any legal way to ensure you'd be taken care of after she was gone. Not financially, you're secure in that regard, but emotionally, she wanted to make sure you'd have a support system, a reason to engage with life again. That's when I suggested a different approach," Mr. Whitmore said. "Through my work, I knew about Second Chapters. I introduced your mother to the organization's coordinator, who introduced her to Richard. I felt like the room was spinning. So this whole thing, you meeting me at book club, the romance, all of it, was orchestrated." "The meeting was orchestrated," Richard admitted. "Your mother told me about the book club, suggested I attend. But everything after that, every conversation, every feeling, every moment we've shared, that was real, Maggie. I was supposed to befriend you, help you reconnect with activities outside caregiving. I wasn't supposed to fall in love with you. But I did. And the midnight conversations?" I demanded. "The whispers about my house and accounts?" Mom actually smiled slightly. "We were planning a surprise, and trying to figure out how to convince you to accept it." Mr. Whitmore pulled out another document. "Mrs. Richardson, your mother has purchased a property in Charleston, South Carolina, a small cottage, fully paid for, in a community with assisted living facilities nearby for when she needs them." I stared at the deed he placed in front of me, a cottage, in Charleston, where Mom had always dreamed of living near the ocean. "She's moving there at the end of this month," Richard continued, "to a place where she'll have professional care when needed, but also independence and community. The whispered conversations you heard were us discussing the logistics, selling some of her investments to cover the ongoing care costs, arranging movers, figuring out how to tell you." "Tell me what?" I whispered, though I was starting to understand. "That I don't need you to take care of me anymore," Mom said, her voice breaking. "That I need you to take care of yourself, to travel, to fall in love, to actually live instead of just existing in this house full of memories." Mr. Whitmore gestured to more documents. "Your mother has arranged everything. She's hired a care coordinator in Charleston, set up her medical care, even joined a book club and an art class. She's planned her own future so that you're free to plan yours. But the confusion? I said desperately. The memory loss, the wandering. I've seen it, Mom. You're sick. I am sick, Mom agreed. The dementia is real, Maggie. Some days are harder than others. But I've been exaggerating it, playing into your expectations of what a dementia patient looks like. Because I knew if you thought I was managing okay, you'd never let yourself believe I could live independently. The betrayal I felt was overwhelming. So you lied to me, both of you, for months. We tried to help you, Richard said gently. I encouraged you to travel, to pursue hobbies, to consider respite care. But every suggestion was met with resistance. You were so convinced that your job in life was to be your mother's keeper that you couldn't see any other possibility. And the house? I asked, my voice hollow. What was that about? I want you to sell it, Mom said simply. This big, empty house full of ghosts. I want you to sell it and use the money to see the world. To do all those things you and Tom dreamed about but never got to do. Greece, Ireland, Japan, all the places marked in that old atlas in his office. Tears were streaming down my face now. You want me to sell our home. I want you to stop living in a museum, Mom said fiercely. I want you to honor Tom's memory by actually living the life he would have wanted for you. Not by martyring yourself in the house where he died. Mr. Whitmore pulled out one final document. This is not a legal requirement, Mrs. Richardson. Your mother cannot force you to do anything. But she's asked me to present you with this option. There's a couple interested in buying your house. They have 3 young children, and they fell in love with the property. The offer is fair market value, and closing could happen within 60 days if you agree. I looked at all of them, the lawyer with his sympathetic eyes, my mother with her fierce love, and Richard with his gentle concern. They'd conspired together, lied to me, manipulated me. All because they thought they knew what was best for my life. The worst part was that they might be right. I need time, I said finally. I need to think. Of course, Mr. Whitmore said, standing. I'll leave these documents with you. Take all the time you need. After he left, the 3 of us sat in silence. Finally, Richard spoke. Maggie, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But please believe me when I say that falling in love with you was never part of anyone's plan. That was just us, me and you, finding each other in the mess of grief and fear and obligation. I looked at him, really looked at him. At the man who'd been patient with my mother, who'd made me laugh again, who'd reminded me what it felt like to be seen as more than a caregiver. Did you mean it? I asked quietly. When you said you loved me? Every word, he said. And I'll keep meaning it, whether you forgive me or not. I turned to Mom. You're really moving to Charleston? I'm really moving, she confirmed, with or without your blessing. Because, Maggie, I love you too much to watch you waste the rest of your life on me. For 3 days, I barely spoke to either of them. Mom gave me space, moving quietly around the house, making her own meals, acting more independent than I'd seen her in a year. Richard called twice daily, but didn't push when I told him I needed time to think. Sarah came over on the 2nd day, and I showed her everything, the documents, the cottage deed, the house offer, all of it. So he's not a con man, she said, looking almost disappointed. Then she laughed, shaking her head. Leave it to Grandma to orchestrate something this elaborate. She lied to me, Sarah. For months. She loved you, Sarah corrected. There's a difference. She picked up the photograph of the Charleston cottage, a charming blue house with white shutters, just 2 blocks from the beach. Mom, be honest. If Grandma had come to you 9 months ago and said, I want to move to Charleston, and I think you should sell the house, what would you have said? I didn't answer because we both knew the truth. I would have fought her. I would have insisted she needed me, that I couldn't possibly sell the home Tom and I had built, that everything was fine the way it was. You've been sleepwalking through life since Dad died, Sarah said gently. We've all seen it. Jennifer and I talked about it constantly, how to help you, how to reach you. But you just kept insisting you were fine, that taking care of Grandma gave you purpose. It did give me purpose. No, it gave you an excuse, Sarah said bluntly. An excuse not to face the fact that Dad is gone and you're still here, still alive, still capable of having adventures and falling in love and being happy. Her words echoed what Mom and Richard had been trying to tell me, and sitting in my living room, surrounded by furniture that Tom and I had picked out together, photos of a life that no longer existed, I finally let myself feel the truth of it. I was afraid Terrified, actually. Not of being alone. I'd gotten used to that. I was afraid of moving forward, of accepting that Tom was gone and my life had to continue without him. Taking care of Mom had been safe. It had given me a role, an identity, a reason to not think about my own empty future. I don't know how to do this, I whispered. I don't know how to let go. Sarah wrapped her arms around me. Nobody does, Mom. But you do it anyway. One day at a time. That evening, I asked Mom to sit with me on the back porch. The October air was cool, and I wrapped us both in blankets as we watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tell me about Charleston, I said. Mom's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. There's a watercolor class on Tuesday mornings, and a book club that meets in a cafe overlooking the harbor. The cottage has a small garden where I can grow tomatoes and herbs. There's a woman in the cottage next door, Eleanor, who's 83 and volunteers at the aquarium. She's already invited me to join her. You've talked to your neighbor? I've been down 3 times to get the cottage ready, Mom admitted. Richard drove me. We didn't tell you because, well, because we knew you'd try to stop me. She was right. I would have. The care coordinator visits twice a week to check on residents, Mom continued. And there's a memory care facility 5 minutes away for when I need it. When the bad days outnumber the good ones, I won't be far from help. But until then, I get to live, Maggie. Really live. At the beach like I've always dreamed. I always thought we'd go together someday, I said. You and me and the girls. Rent a house on the coast for a week. We still can, Mom said. You can visit me. The cottage has 2 bedrooms. But Maggie, I don't want you to visit out of obligation. I want you to visit because you're passing through on your way to somewhere else. Because you're traveling, exploring, living your own life. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. I don't know if I can sell the house. Every room has memories of Tom, I know, Mom said softly. But honey, Tom isn't in this house. He's in your heart. He'll go with you wherever you go. And he would be so angry if he knew you'd turned your home into a shrine instead of a life. She was right. Tom had always been about forward motion, about adventure. About squeezing every drop out of life. When he got sick, one of the hardest things for him wasn't dying. It was knowing I'd be left behind. Promise me you'll keep living, he'd said in those final weeks. Promise me you won't just stop, Maggie. Please, I'd promised. And then I'd spent 2 years doing exactly what he'd made me swear not to do. What about Richard? I asked. Was any of it real? All of it was real, Mom said firmly. Yes? I introduced you through the volunteer program. Yes, I hoped you'd connect. But Maggie, I've watched that man fall in love with you. The way he looks at you, talks about you when you're not around, that's not acting. That's a man who found something he thought he'd lost forever. He lied to me. He omitted telling you about how you met, Mom corrected. Everything else, the feelings, the conversations, the connection, that was genuine. And you know what? You fell in love with him too, before you knew any of this. That love doesn't disappear just because the circumstances weren't perfect. I sat with that truth for a long moment. Then I asked the question that had been haunting me. Mom, are you scared? Of Charleston, of living alone, of the dementia getting worse? Terrified, she admitted. But I'm more scared of dying in this house, watching my daughter waste away out of some misplaced sense of duty. At least in Charleston, I'll be scared and alive. That's better than safe and slowly disappearing. We sat together in silence as the sun finally dipped below the horizon. And in that darkness, I felt something shift inside me. Not a dramatic change, but a quiet acceptance, maybe even the first stirring of hope. The next morning I called Richard. Can you meet me at the park? I asked. The one where we had our first walk? Of course, he said immediately. When now? He was waiting on our usual bench when I arrived, looking nervous and hopeful. I sat down beside him. Not quite touching but close enough to feel his warmth. I'm angry at you, I said without preamble. For the deception, for making me feel foolish, for conspiring with my mother, I know, he said quietly. I'm sorry, but I'm also grateful, I continued. Because you reminded me what it feels like to laugh, to look forward to something, to be seen as a woman and not just a widow or a caretaker. He turned to look at me then, and I saw the vulnerability in his eyes. My wife Linda, he said slowly, on her last year? She didn't know who I was most days. But there were moments, brief, beautiful moments, when she'd surface. And she'd look at me and say, don't stop living when I'm gone. Promise me, I promised her. But for 2 years after she died, I broke that promise. I existed, but I didn't live. What changed? I asked. I met a woman at a caregivers support group. he said. She was caring for her husband with ALS, and she was so angry. Not at him, but at herself, she said. I'm so busy keeping him alive that I've forgotten how to be alive myself. And I realized that's what I'd been doing, and it's what I saw you doing with Dorothy. He took my hand carefully, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. When your mother contacted Second Chapters when they asked if I'd be willing to reach out to you, I almost said no, he admitted. I thought, I'm not qualified to help someone else heal when I'm barely holding myself together. But then I saw your photo, your smile that didn't reach your eyes, and I thought maybe we could help each other figure out how to live again. Did we? I asked. Help each other. You did, he said. These past 6 months, loving you, learning you, being with you, I felt alive again, Maggie, really alive. And I hope, even if you can't forgive me, that maybe I helped you feel that way too. I thought about the past 6 months. The laughter, the conversations, the gentle touches. The way my heart had started beating faster when I saw his car pull up. The way I'd started thinking about a future instead of just a past. You did help me, I admitted, even if you were lying about how we met. Not lying, he corrected gently. Just omitting. Everything else was truth, Maggie, every word I said. Every feeling I shared. All of it was real. I looked at our intertwined hands, at the autumn leaves falling around us, at this man who'd come into my life under false pretenses and somehow become essential anyway. I don't know what happens next, I said honestly. I don't know if I can sell my house, or if I'm ready to travel, or if I can get past feeling manipulated. But I do know one thing. What's that? I don't want to lose you, I said. I'm angry and hurt and confused, but underneath all of that, I still love you. And that terrifies me. Richard's eyes filled with tears. It terrifies me too. But Maggie, love is supposed to be terrifying. That's how you know it's real. He kissed me then, soft and gentle, and full of promise. And for the first time since discovering their deception, I kissed him back. We didn't have all the answers. We didn't know what the future held, but we had this moment, this choice, this chance to move forward together. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. 3 months later, I stood in the empty living room of the house I'd called home for 32 years. The new owners, a young couple with 3 children who'd squealed with delight when they saw the big backyard, would be moving in tomorrow. Everything I was keeping had already been moved to a storage unit. Everything else had been donated or divided between Sarah and Jennifer. The house echoed now, stripped of furniture and memories. Or rather, stripped of furniture. The memories, I was learning, came with me whether I wanted them to or not. You ready? Richard asked softly from the doorway. I took one last look around. This was where Tom and I had brought our babies home from the hospital. Where we'd celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. Where we'd fought and made up and built a life together. Where he'd taken his last breath, holding my hand, telling me he loved me. Thank you, I whispered to the empty room. To Tom, to the life we'd shared. Thank you for everything. Then I turned and walked out the front door without looking back. Richard drove us to the airport, his hand occasionally reaching over to squeeze mine. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Mom had moved to Charleston 6 weeks ago, and she'd been sending me photos almost daily. The sunrise over the ocean, her watercolor class paintings, Eleanor from next door holding up a fish she'd caught. In every photo, Mom looked vibrant and alive in a way I hadn't seen since Dad died. She's thriving, I'd told Richard after one particularly long video call where Mom had excitedly told me about a local theater group she'd joined. She's living, Richard had corrected. The way she always wanted to but couldn't while she was worried about you. He was right. And now it was my turn. Sarah and Jennifer had been surprised but supportive when I told them my plans. Mom? Are you sure? Sarah had asked. That's a lot of change all at once. I'm 68 years old, I'd replied. I don't have time to take things slowly anymore. Jennifer had just hugged me tight and whispered, Dad would be so proud of you. At the airport, Richard and I checked in for our flight, the first leg of a 3-month trip through Europe. Greece first, because Tom and I had always talked about seeing the Parthenon, then Italy, France, Ireland. All the places marked in that old atlas, all the dreams deferred. Nervous, Richard asked as we waited at the gate. Terrified, I admitted. I've never been out of the country before. I don't speak any foreign languages. What if I hate traveling? What if this whole thing is a massive mistake? Richard smiled. Then we come home early. Maggie, there's no test you have to pass here. This is just us, trying something new, seeing what happens. And when we get back, I asked, It was a conversation we'd been dancing around for weeks. When we get back, I'd like to look for a place together, Richard said carefully. Nothing big, maybe a condo near the water. 2 bedrooms so your girls can visit. A balcony where we can have coffee in the mornings. He paused. But only if that's what you want. There's no pressure, no timeline. We figure this out together. A year ago. Hell, 6 months ago, the thought of living with someone other than Tom would have seemed impossible. But now, looking at Richard, I could imagine it. Morning coffee on a balcony, evening walks on the beach. Building something new without erasing what I'd had before. I think I'd like that, I said. When we get back. Our flight was called, and as we boarded, I thought about all the versions of myself I'd been over the years. The young bride, the mother, the caregiver, the widow, the woman too afraid to move forward. And now maybe, just maybe, the adventurer, the woman in love, the person who'd learned that letting go didn't mean forgetting, and that starting over didn't mean betrayal. We settled into our seats, and as the plane lifted off, I looked out the window at the city growing smaller below us. Somewhere down there was the cemetery where Tom was buried. The house we'd shared. The life I'd lived. But I was up here now, moving forward, literally flying toward something new. You okay? Richard asked, noticing my tears. Yeah, I said, wiping my eyes. I'm saying goodbye, to Tom. To the version of myself who needed to keep everything frozen in time, I said. To the Maggie who was too scared to live, because living meant accepting that Tom was really gone. Richard didn't say anything, just held my hand as the plane climbed higher into the clouds. I pulled out my phone and opened the last text message from Mom, sent that morning. Have the adventure of a lifetime, sweetheart. And remember, this isn't the end of your story with Tom. This is you honoring everything he taught you about love and courage and really living. He's with you, and so am I. Now go see the world. Below the message was a photo she'd taken that morning. The sunrise over Charleston Harbor, pink and gold and absolutely breathtaking. I sent back, thank you, Mom. For everything. For the tough love, the elaborate scheming, and for teaching me that sometimes the people who love us most have to push us out of the nest. I love you. Her response came immediately. I love you too. Now put your phone away and look at the clouds. Tom always loved flying. He'd want you to enjoy every second. She was right. Tom had loved flying. Loved the moment when the plane broke through the clouds into impossible blue sky. I turned off my phone and looked out the window. We were above the clouds now, suspended in sunlight, heading toward something unknown and beautiful and terrifying. What are you thinking? Richard asked. I thought about my mother in her cottage by the sea, painting watercolors and joining theater groups, and living fully despite her diagnosis. I thought about Sarah and Jennifer, relieved to see their mother smile again. I thought about the young family moving into my house, filling it with new laughter and new memories. And I thought about Tom, who'd loved me enough to make me promise I wouldn't stop living. Who'd spent his last weeks trying to prepare me for a future without him, even though every conversation broke both our hearts. I'm thinking, I said slowly, that love doesn't end when someone dies, it just transforms. It becomes the courage to keep going, the permission to be happy again, the foundation you build new things on. Richard kissed my temple. That's beautiful. My mother is both the most manipulative and most loving person I've ever known, I said with a small laugh. She literally conspired behind my back, pretended to be more confused than she was, and orchestrated my love life like some kind of geriatric matchmaker. Are you glad she did? Richard asked. I looked at him, at this man who'd been hired to befriend me, who'd fallen in love with me anyway, who was patient enough to wait while I worked through my anger and fear and grief. Yeah, I said, I am. Because if she hadn't, I'd still be in that house, taking care of someone who didn't need that kind of care, hiding from my own life. And I would have missed this, all of this. The flight attendant came by with drinks. Richard ordered coffee. I ordered champagne. Celebrating, the attendant asked with a smile. New beginnings, I said, raising my plastic cup toward Richard. He touched his coffee cup to my champagne. To new beginnings. And to the people who love us enough to force us toward them. To my mother, I added. The most devious, brilliant, loving woman I know. To Dorothy, Richard agreed. May we all be that brave when we're 89. I sipped my champagne and looked out at the clouds. Somewhere below was everything I'd been. Somewhere ahead was everything I could become. And for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't afraid of the journey. 3 months later, I sat in Mom's cottage in Charleston showing her photos from our travels, the Parthenon at sunset, gondolas in Venice, The cliffs of Moher in Ireland, where Richard had proposed with a simple silver band, and I'd said yes through tears and laughter. You look happy, Mom said, studying a photo of me and Richard in front of the Eiffel Tower. Her hands shook slightly as she held the phone. The tremors were getting worse, but her eyes were clear and bright. I am happy, I said. Scared sometimes, confused about the future, still sad about Tom, but underneath all of that, genuinely happy. Good, Mom said firmly. That's all I ever wanted. Eleanor knocked and came in with a tray of tea. She'd become a good friend over the past months, keeping an eye on Mom, letting me know when the bad days outnumbered the good ones. Your mother beat me at Scrabble again yesterday, Eleanor complained cheerfully. I think she's hustling me. Mom just grinned. Can't help it if I know more words than you. Free, Eleanor? Watching them banter, seeing Mom in this sun-filled cottage surrounded by her art and her books and her ocean view, I understood what she'd been trying to tell me all along. This wasn't about abandoning me or pushing me away. It was about both of us learning to live fully in whatever time we had left. The dementia was still there. Some days Mom forgot things, got confused, needed help. But she had help now, professional care when she needed it, Eleanor's friendship, a community that supported her. And she had her independence, her dignity, her joy. And I had my life back, not the life I'd had with Tom, that was gone forever. But a new life, built on the foundation of everything Tom and I had shared, everything Mom had taught me, everything Richard and I were learning together. That evening, Richard and I walked on the beach near Mom's cottage. The sun was setting, painting the sky in impossible colors. Think she'll be okay? I asked, watching the waves. I think she's already okay, Richard said. Better than okay. She's exactly where she needs to be. What about us? I asked. We've been traveling, staying with Mom, avoiding the big decisions. But we need to figure out what's next. Richard stopped walking and turned to face me. What do you want, Maggie? Really want? I thought about it. Really thought about it, not just giving the answer I thought I should give. I want the condo near the water, I said. 2 bedrooms for the girls, coffee on the balcony, a life with you. But I also want the freedom to visit Mom whenever she needs me, and to travel sometimes, and to keep discovering who I am now at 68, instead of just being who I've always been. That sounds perfect, Richard said. Because that's exactly what I want too. He pulled me close, and we stood there on the beach as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Somewhere behind us, Mom was probably watching from her cottage window, satisfied with her matchmaking. And somewhere beyond the horizon, I like to imagine Tom was watching too, proud and relieved that I'd finally kept my promise. I was living. Really, truly living. And it had taken betrayal and manipulation and elaborate schemes and tough love to get me here. It had taken my mother pretending to be sicker than she was, and Richard omitting the truth about how we met, and both of them conspiring to force me out of my safe, small, grief-stricken life. But standing on that beach, engaged to a man I loved, with a mother who was thriving in her independence, and a future full of possibility instead of obligation, I couldn't bring myself to regret any of it. Sometimes the people who love us most have to deceive us to save us. Sometimes betrayal is really just love wearing a disguise. And sometimes, when you catch your boyfriend whispering to your mother at midnight, it's not the beginning of a nightmare. It's the beginning of a new dream.